Hello and welcome back to George Forge and Welding.
Today I will be showing you how to make these little copper mushrooms.
Let's go ahead and fire up the forge and I'll kind of walk you through the process.
I'm going to start out by taking this 3/8 inch copper bar and forging down the end of it until it fits through that 1/4 inch hole in this piece of plate. Here are the tools I'll be using. Just a larger hammer, I want to say it's 2.5 pounds, just for getting that copper forged most of the way down. This cross peen I will be using to forge out the head of the mushroom to make it wider. This small hammer I'll just be using to get it closer and closer to fit through that 1/4 inch hole. And then this little one, I just used the ball peen side of it to make the texturing on the head of the mushroom, and I use this side to get the texturing on the stem of the mushroom. I also have a bucket of water here because when you heat copper up and then you quench it in water, it actually softens it. Sometimes it's easier to do small details when the copper is cold but soft instead of trying to work it hot. To start off, I'm just going to pick a point, maybe 1 inch or so down on it, to where I'm going to try to start forging out the stem. That actually looks like it might be too much, so I might move that further down actually. One of the most difficult parts about this is trying to keep the stem centered with the rest of this, because copper is so soft it likes to try to move to one side, so that's one thing you'll want to be careful about. It may not look like this material is very hot, but that's because it's bright out here. It actually is red when I'm taking it out of the forge. Right now I'm just using the cross peen to try to draw that material out further so that I don't have to work it as much with the flat hammer. All right, we're getting really close, and now I'm going to switch to the small hammer. As you can see, I've gotten a bit off center here, so I may have to try to knock that back in center here in a second. See if that fits. Getting closer. So copper conducts electricity and heat really well. So this end is getting hot even through gloves, so I'm going to go ahead and cool this end off real quick. All right, that's good enough. Now I'm gonna go ahead and try to recenter that in the bar, and then we'll cut off the piece it's gonna turn into the mushroom. Looks a lot better. Knowing how far up to cut it really just depends on how big you want the top of your mushroom, but I'm probably gonna cut mine about right there. This part is where it can get tricky, because as you try to upset this mushroom head, it can try very easily to get off center. I'm just going to do a couple hits, and you can see it's starting to lean over already. So I'm going to take it out and straighten it out and heat it back up.
As you can see, it's a little bit off center. So what I'm gonna do is use my cross peen and try to force it back over in that direction. That widened it out a bit more and made it a little bit more centered. Now I'm just going to draw more towards this corner. Now that I've got it more centered, I'm going to go ahead and make it a little rounder. We're slightly off-centered, but not terribly. This is the point where heating it up and then quenching it is a lot easier because it's so thin that it loses its heat really fast, so that's what I'm going to start doing from this point. Now that it's softened, the first thing I'm going to do is try to draw this side out right here. It's a little bit better. Keep going. As I hammer the copper, it compresses and hardens, so every once in a while I'll heat it back up and just quench it again. All I'm doing now is just stretching it out a little further, making it bigger on the top. It's getting pretty thin, so I might do it one more time. When I do the little texturing and dimpling, it will spread it a little bit more as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and texture the stem on it, just because that's a lot easier when the head is straight and not curved down. You don't have to texture it, but I think it gives it a more interesting look. Now for texturing the top. Now all that's left to do is to shape it over, but I'm going to go ahead and finish up the other one and then I'll show you how I do that. I finished the second one off, so I'm just going to heat them up and quench them and form the top. The method I use for forming the top is pretty simple. I just use the horn of my anvil. Basically just go around and gently bend the edges over and work your way in until it's the shape you like. Because of how round the horn of my anvil is, I can't really get that center, so it stays flat. So what you can do is just set it upright like this to form that top part. So you can go as round or as flat as you like. I might go a little more round than that and then shape the stem however you want. So there's really two options on how you can finish these off. You can either just leave them with that red oxide that they get when you quench them, that nice old rustic patina look, or you can use some Scotch Brite and just gently buff them to get it back to a copper color and then hit them on a buffing wheel. I completely forgot to stamp these with my maker's mark while they were flat, so this
Might be a little difficult. There we go.
I don't have any Scotch-Brite on hand, so I'm just going to use some 600 grit sandpaper. I like doing it this way better because it just shows the texture more, because it brightens up all the high points. Last time I made these, I was making these little mushrooms on a log just for decoration. But this time, I'm replacing the little wood piece on the end of this like fan and light puller. So instead of putting it in wood, which obviously all you do is drill a 1/4-inch hole that would fit into, I'm going to take a small piece of this chain and solder it into the top of the mushroom. Start with a 7/64 bit, and then if I need to, I can always go bigger. The tricky part is going to be trying to get it directly into the stem. I'm just gonna look from the side, make a mark this way, and also that way, and that should get me close enough. And we hope we hit it, because if we don't, it's going in my fingers. I am gonna have to go a little bit bigger, but that'll at least give me a starting point. Try 1/8. Looks like we're right on. I'm gonna move my fingers out of the way just in case though. That one's perfect. And that one should work too. This is the only soldering wire I have right now, and as you can tell, it's way too big for doing stuff like this. So I'm gonna see if I can just hammer this down and get a thin little section. That should make it a lot easier. I think what I'm going to do on this one is fill that with solder and then dip it down in there. You do have to be really careful of that with these little mushrooms. It's very easy to grab an edge, especially when trying to do this underside. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and hit that like button and maybe even drop a comment down below. And if you aren't subscribed, I'd appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button.